Welcome to the second episode in a two-part Legendarium series about the life of Fredegund, who went from being a slave girl to Queen of the Franks. In the comments section, please let me know whether you think Fredegund deserves to be remembered as a heroine, a horror, or something in between. In the first episode, we learned about how Fredegund saved her husband's throne, and a grateful King Chilperic then made Queen Fredegund his most trusted advisor. Soon Fredegund made important choices about everything from taxes to military strategy. In 584, on his way home from a hunting expedition, Chilperic suddenly died in a strange accident. When angry Franks became convinced that Fredegund ordered him murdered, she fled to the Paris cathedral with her 3-month-old son Clothar II. She enjoyed protection from a third royal brother, Guntram of Burgundy. In time, Fredegund smoothed things over and returned with her son to rule as his regent. How did Fredegund smooth things over with men who believed that she murdered her husband and king? Here is how. On April 14th, 586, the Bishop of Rouen, who had publicly accused Fredegund of murder before, said Easter Mass before his congregation and then sat down for a brief rest as the congregation sang. As he sat, a man rose from the pews, rushed at the bishop, and stabbed him in the armpit. When he rose, the bishop began bleeding profusely upon the altar. Fredegund came to visit the wounded bishop, proclaimed her sorrow at the tragedy, and offered the services of her favorite doctor. Of course, Fredegund arranged the murder in the cathedral, and the bishop said as much to her face before he breathed his last. However, life changed for the worst when Guntram of Burgundy, Fredegund's old ally, finally gave up the ghost on March 28, 592, just past his 60th birthday. Queen Brunhild's son inherited Burgundy, which meant the lands of mother and son, now known as the royal pair, dwarfed and encircled those of Fredegund and her son Clothar II. Brunhild had not forgotten that Fredegund murdered her sister on her path to power and intended to take revenge. She approved an attack on Brunhild's old capital, Soissons. She sent Wintrio of Champagne along with warriors from both Austrasia and Burgundy. They left the countryside around Soissons devastated, crops burned to ashes, and the army famished. When Fredegund readied for a confrontation, she marched out dressed in armor with her warriors. To shore up their morale, she allowed them to loot one of her husband's old houses and passed out the loot. Fredegund ordered her army to march at night, a row of warriors, each carrying a tree branch to camouflage the horsemen behind them. Fredegund also fastened bells to their horses, used on mounts led out to graze. When the enemy sentries heard the ringing, they assumed it came from their own grazing horses and did not act. By this scheme, Fredegund secretly wheeled around the enemy rear and slaughtered them. She then devastated enemy countryside and passed out yet more spoils to her men. This should have been enough, but the aging queen had one final drama to play out. She became increasingly annoyed with her daughter Rigunth, who resented her mother for living so long and keeping the crown on her head. Even worse, Rigunth had a habit of sleeping around with men at the court. An annoyed Fredegund then opened her treasure chest to her troublesome daughter and asked her to pick out jewels for her coronation. When Rigunth stuck her head in, Fredegund pressed the chest lid down upon her neck. If not for the guards intervening, Fredegund likely would have killed her own daughter. Not long after, on December 8, 597, around the age of 45, the strawberry blonde slave-turned-queen died of an unknown illness. Although Fredegund did not live to see it, her son Clothar II won a final victory over her old enemy Brunhild of Austrasia. War broke out between Neustria and Austrasia-Burgundy, and Brunhild personally led the army against Clothar II, son of her old enemy Fredegund, at the Battle of Aisne. Austrasian and Burgundian dukes betrayed their queen and defected to Neustria during the battle. This turned the tide so that Brunhild and her son Sigebert II had to flee the battlefield and left Clothar II of Neustria with no choice but to pursue them. When Clothar's Frankish warriors finally caught up with her, they insisted upon a death fitting for the unpopular queen. As the method of execution, Clothar II ordered Brunhild's limbs tied to wild horses. His warriors then whipped the horses until they ran off in different directions and split Brunhild into 4 pieces. The warriors then burned her remains so that no trace of Brunhild remained. On the other hand, Fredegund's tomb is on display at the majestic Basilica of Saint Denis in Paris, where royal custodians moved it after the French Revolution 1,200 years later. The queen's likeness is rendered in stones and enamel set into mortar. In that image, outlined by copper, the former slave holds a scepter and wears a crown. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.